Dave. I really appreciate it.
All right,
It's definitely
sure.
all good. Yeah, so Adam Satterfield, been in the industry for around 2 decades. Currently a director of engineering enablement at Global Payments, which is a financial technology company, and we're responsible for a lot of the cloud strategy, DevOps, and data center migration testing that's going on. So really excited to be here. This is my first time speaking at the Pacific Northwest Software Quality Conference. Super excited. Had a lot of good conversations with a lot of folks, Dave, Philip, and a lot of folks. So really excited to chat here. Also want to say thanks to my friends at Catalan for partnering with me on this. We'll talk a little bit more about that here at the very end. But yeah, so as Dave was saying, we're seeing a big trend and questions around test automation strategies, especially as folks are adopting agile and looking at new ways to do things. We found that there's just is a great time to go back and look and see, how are we doing our strategies? Are we doing our strategies? And really, should we do them overall? So with that, let's get started. So gave the more formal intro, but this is me. I'm a dad. I'm also a dog father. So you may hear barking and stuff in the background. It's totally normal. It is quite the zoo that we live in here. Also a gamer. Love technology, building computers. As you can see through all my things here in the background. I love gaming. Spend a lot of time gaming with my daughter, having a lot of fun there. Also a huge coffee addict. Although, I'm sure with everyone, coming from the Pacific Northwest here, you kind of understand my total love of coffee. So, not sponsored by Death Wish, but, if anyone from Death Wish is here, happy to take that sponsorship. So with that, we're going to go over a couple of various things. We're going to kind of start, reframe, what is a strategy overall? We're going to talk about some things that can go wrong. We're going to go and talk about the differences between a regular strategy and what we're going to call a test automation strategy, as well as, go over some steps to give you an opportunity to take home some actionable items for how you could potentially implement a test automation strategy on your own, or potentially if you've got one, maybe we can give you some ideas on how to modify that or change it to make it a little bit more valuable. So with that, let's kick right into it. So I always like to start out, with a definition. I think that, in order to have effective communication, we should be on the same page. We should, be playing on the same page of music, as it were. So if we look at the definition for a strategy, it's a plan of action. I really love that definition because if we think about the goal of quality and the goal of testing is to, investigate, it is to perform actions, it is to identify the level of quality in a system, it is to use all the things around you to try to figure out how the application is working. And so when we think about then what a test strategy is a plan of action for how you're going to perform that work to identify the quality of a system. So we see, and a lot of people get really, kind of held up in terms of thinking a test strategy is a document, or it is something that is written down as something we're forced to do. And I really want to kind of take a step back and say, no, let's get rid of the fact that it's a document, it's a website, it's a SharePoint site, it's a Confluence link, and think, what is our overall goal for having a strategy? And it's really to define your plan of action. And when we think about, the reasons why we want to have, this plan of action, I always like to kind of go all the way back to the beginning, to the days where we potentially didn't have a testing strategy, and these are real examples of projects and teams that I've worked with that didn't have a testing strategy, and some things that went wrong through that process. So let's go over a couple of these, and I want you to think as we go through these: are these scenarios that I have faced, or are these things that we have a testing strategy and they're actively fixing those right now? So really, this first one is when we think about testing strategy, a lot of times people don't think about business value, and ultimately you need to think about business value because it's where you're going to get your return on investment. Now, I know a lot of us from a test automation standpoint hate hearing that term, but when we think about the way that especially a lot of large enterprises work, ROI is a fact of life. It is something that we have to consider. When we're asking for money to implement a solution, or when we have individuals, we have people, contractors, employees working on a solution, Oftentimes those in finance and those in the business need to understand, okay, why are we doing this? Is it effectively pushing the bar and moving the needle forward? Is it giving us what we need to grow our business, or to stay afloat and be better than our competitors? So without that testing strategy, one of the things that we found is it's very difficult to show your ROI because you don't have anything to tie it to. You may say, well, we're going to implement a test automation solution, and we're just going to go forward and we're just going to start automating some things. And then the question ultimately comes up and say, okay, well, great. What are some things we accomplished? And, did we save money or did we save time? And if we don't have anything documented in terms of a plan there, it's very difficult to show that business value. Next, and this is one that I see quite often, is without a test automation strategy, it's really easy to get lost in terms of, you may have a goal in your mind, you may have maybe potentially some ideas, and then you go forward and start implementing. Now, that's great for a proof of concept, right? Proof of concept, wonderful idea, really love those. But when it comes to a full-on implementation of a test automation solution, you really need to understand what your goals are, right? Are your goals to, for instance, one of the teams I recently worked with, their goal was to automate their regression suite, right? So their solution that they looked for was, something just to do that. That was their main goal. Some teams may have a goal of automating, API or database testing. So make sure you really understand your goals and make sure those drive into your testing strategy. The next one is, we definitely see this quite often, is something we like to call technology efficiency loss. It's where we have an idea for a technology we potentially want to use at the beginning of the project. We go and we start implementing, and then we find out midway through, or maybe before we're about to do our execution, that it really doesn't fit the problems that we have. So, we've seen this with, multitude of tools out on the market, right? Where it may look good on the surface, you start implementing it, and then the maintainability becomes very difficult, or your website doesn't necessarily natively support the functionality that the tool provides. So without that strategy, without really understanding your goals and your business goals, there's a high chance that you are going to wind up having to change your technology, or you're potentially going to say, hey, the things we thought we were going to be automate, well, it's actually a lot less than what we originally were discussing. And this is my favorite one. I'm sure if we did a poll here, we would find that nobody ever in this conference has ever experienced a testing squeeze. But all joking aside, it's a real thing. Whether you're agile, waterfall, Kanban, whatever, right? We all experience this, where there's a hiccup in development, there's a hiccup in requirements, there's the rush to market, and testing gets squeezed, right? And if we don't have a strategy, we don't know what was the most important thing to test and what can we cut with the least amount of risk. We're going to talk about a risk-based approach here a little bit later, but out of all the other ones, if you don't care about ROI, you don't necessarily care about a vision, this one right here is one of the most critical reasons to have a testing strategy. So you can actually actively look at something and say, okay, great, I know what my plans are. I know what our goals were. I know, what the highest level, risk or most important business items are. So I know what can get cut. And without that testing strategy, it makes this answer very, very difficult. And, out of all the pain points I've seen with testers that I've worked with, this is probably the number one pain point that they're actively looking to solve. So with that, I want to go over essentially what is a test automation strategy. We've kind of talked about, we hinted around some of the pieces that might fall in there to help us answer ROI, business value, goals and visions, things like that. But, when it comes down to a test automation strategy, what is it really? And I like simple terms. I'm a pretty simple guy myself. And, really from what I see and what we've seen from an implementation standpoint, your test automation strategy is just a microcosm of your larger testing strategy. I'm a big fan of reusing what we have. So when it comes to creating a test automation strategy, why should we reinvent the wheel and come up with a brand new process? When one of the great things we could do is we could say, hey, are there things that we're leveraging right now? Processes, performance, personas, huge fan of personas, criteria that we've already started leveraging for some of our other functional testing. And can we use some of that same, work for a test automation strategy? And oftentimes the answer is yes. And one of the things that I also want to, reinforce with folks is I'm a big fan of having your testing strategy be a series of components. Those components may consist of a security testing plan, performance testing plan, a test automation plan. And your overall test strategy is, the kind of guidepost for those various bits of work. I'm not a fan of having separate strategies that live and exist off on their own. Now, again, we think about strategies, what we talked about before. I'm not talking about one large document. I'm talking about a plan of action. They may be various documents, they may live in various places, but they should be very interconnected and very much talking to one another. So when we think about it that way, what are some things that we can actually actively do, to start, working on this? So, before we kind of get into some of the actionable items here, I do get this question from, some of the newer QA teams, the newer testing teams, and as well as testing leadership in terms of, why should our test automation professionals spend time documenting a strategy or working on a strategy when I can actually just have them automating? And, we have, 4 main points here for that. And really one of the number one items is, the goal of us as quality professionals many times is to inform. We inform on risk. We inform on the quality of a product. We inform on, the security, potential security issues of a product. And if we don't have a strategy, it's going to be very difficult to make sure that we're informing and communicating effectively. And that's really where the second point comes in, is, we can take ideas that are in our head, things that we have that we believe are good ideas, put them down into a plan, whatever that format might be. We're going to talk about that here in a little bit. And we can communicate that out. More effectively. And from the standpoint of, when it comes down to, trying to have a conversation with someone, and I want you to think about this from a visual standpoint. When you have a conversation with someone, a lot of times, especially now that we're virtual, they're hearing your words, they may be checking their email, they maybe are, zoning in and out of the conversation. Whereas if we can have something visual that we can show someone, it gives them the opportunity to relate to what is being discussed, to be able to have, more connections being made to the brain where we have something visual, we have something auditory as well. So when we think about that test strategy is, having something that we, want to get, down on paper, we want to get into some sort of system, allows you to be able to communicate way more effectively. And, we talked about this before, the discussion starter, right? It gives us the ability to, have that conversation, to be able to really kind of understand, are we on the right path? Are we showing the right value? And then lastly, audit purposes, obviously from a financial technology standpoint, very, very important from our side, showing the work that was done, what was executed upon, the technologies and the libraries that we use. So it's very important from that standpoint as well. So this is something we talked about a little bit ago as well, is this really just a document? And, I want to make sure that we look at the life cycle from the standpoint of a testing strategy and how it could potentially relate to a DevOps life cycle or an SDLC life cycle. I don't like to look at it as a flat process of I go straight from I need a strategy to I'm starting to write down a strategy. You can actually go through various phases of, okay, well, what are some of our goals? Let's sketch out, let's write down some of our goals, having conversations with folks on your team, potentially building a living document to where things might change. Maybe we're going to go through a proof of concept. Maybe we're going to implement 10% of our solution just to kind of figure out where we are, make sure that we're, gut checking that we're in the right place. And then lastly, it gets into that working document. Again, if you're an audit, based company, it may be something that you have to, seal and sign off on for a certain release. But for other companies, having something that is working, that is changing as you get new insights, better understandings, product changes, it can certainly change over time. So it's not something that is just created once and done and you never look back to it. So this is why we're all really here anyways, is to get some ideas that we can take home with us. So the first one, and this will obviously come as no surprise for folks, since we were talking about ROI earlier, is defining your high business value test. I worked with a good buddy of mine, Joe Marcassani, a number of years ago, and he taught me this, and I'm forever grateful of this technique. And we like to define what we call HBVs, or high business value tests. And very simply, they are the flows that, if failed, would cause the business to fail. If you're not familiar with Knight Capital, from a software bug standpoint. Highly recommend you do a little bit of research there. It's essentially is a Wall Street trading company that lost $480 million in 45 minutes due to a software bug that was pushed to production. And it was because they were using an older version of a library. Nobody really thought to test, even though people knew that it existed. It went to production, failed on the system, and the company went belly up in one day. So when we talk about flows that truly, if they failed, could cause the business to fail, it gives us a really good starting point to say, hey, when we're looking at trying to figure out what do we automate, right? What do we look to test first? Understanding what the business deems as valuable is very, very important. Not only from the standpoint of you can turn around and say, hey, all these critical paths, all these critical scenarios, they're automated, they're secure, they're run at every sprint or every release. As well as you can say, well, we know we've got this technology, and where do we start? What should we implement? What should we test first? And this is another great way to be able to answer that question. One of the next things you want to consider when it comes to a test automation strategy is a risk-based approach. I'm a big fan of risk-based approach, essentially in any sort of testing that we do, performance testing, security testing, test automation, whatever it might be, as well as kind of that requirements gathering stage as well, is understanding what the risk is will also allow you to answer, what should we validate first, as well as when we get to that testing squeeze, what can we cut? What has the lowest risk? And very, very, simply, it's, what is the business impact of if something went wrong, and you add that into the probability of it actually going wrong, and that gives you your risk. Now, there's various ways that you can do weights around that. You can, some people will multiply those two together, giving each one a number, and that'll give you your risk numbers. Or some people just write it down. I'm a big fan of just writing it down of like, well, okay, well, we know that if, people are unable to log in, then, it's going to cause, major problems with our, downstream systems because people won't be able to check out and we won't be making any money. So, but the probability might be very low because it's a very robust system that has, multiple ways to log in. It's got MFA, it's got various things. So while the impact may be high, the probability is low. So, is it something that we need to validate? Maybe, maybe not. Whereas, someone entering in a credit card number, if that's not working, there's really only one way to do it, only one way to check out. Probability might be high that if, something might break, since we're talking to a credit card company. Therefore, that is the number one scenario that we want to validate. So if you're not using a risk-based approach to your testing right now, I highly recommend doing some research. There's some great, articles and talks out there around risk-based testing, and it's really something that you can use to shore up your knowledge from a test automation standpoint. Next is, you want to take a look and make sure that you are documenting and truly understanding all the various, technical pieces of your test automation strategy. We'll talk about environments here in a minute, but this is really, what tools and what technologies are potentially going to be required to run the test automation framework to make sure that, people have access to it. One of the great examples is, I was at a company, we implemented a solution and the testers couldn't use it because nobody told them they needed VPN access to be able to access the tool. So our whole rollout was delayed while we worked on trying to get all those tickets created and trying to get everyone VPN access. So when it comes down to the actual solution itself, you want to make sure, where does it live? Where is it stored? How do people access it? Are there current things that we can leverage or that have already been built to integrate into with this technology? And this is one area that you want to make sure when you include this in your testing strategy that you continually update it. Are there, libraries? What sort of patching is required? What version are we running? Who has access to it, right? So really kind of understanding, the very, fine technical pieces behind this, not only will help you as you're ramping up new employees or new contractors, but it'll also help you to look back and say, okay, this is where we started. Here's where we've, gotten to. And so you can actually be able to show, the growth of, the access, the growth of the tool, making sure that we're using the right version, potentially from a security standpoint. That's very, very important. And so this is one that is oftentimes, people just, leave this out. They think, well, it's not that important, but definitely want you to take a hard look at that because this is a very, very important piece, especially from a release to release standpoint. Inside the release, it might not be as important, but from a historical standpoint, it is a key piece of your test strategy. So this is one as well that I see overlooked, or it lives somewhere in another document or another strategy somewhere else, and especially this last one. So I'm going to go last bullet on up, and it's the retry logic. This is one of the areas, as I'm working to mentor and have conversations with test automation professionals is, what is your retry logic if your test fails due to a data problem? Right? Are you just going to fail out, and it may potentially cause problems downstream, right, with other tests, or are you going to potentially retry, maybe try to have some sort of function or library or something that you call that could potentially re-provision that data instead of just failing out? Where's your data live, right? Are you calling it from an Excel sheet? Are you calling it from a SQL database? Are you generating it on the fly? So really kind of understanding how you're looking at that from a test automation framework standpoint is very, very important. And, one of the things I've seen, especially with larger organizations, is you may have one or two, test automation professionals handling it a certain way, and then you may have another couple handling it a different way. And then you wind up with a framework that has multiple different ways to handle data that aren't necessarily cohesive with one another. And from a test automation framework fragility standpoint, it'll really cause problems for you down the road. So highly recommend, look at how you're going to handle data, what you're going to be doing from a retry standpoint. There's a great opportunity at this point to have a conversation around security as well, making sure that we're not using, PII or PCI data, not make sure that, the things that we're using, we're not putting in secrets, right? We're not, using, passwords. We're not adding those things into our test automation framework, because, really, as we go through this, and we'll talk about this here in a minute, is, your framework is code, and it really should be treated as such. So kind of, kicks us into the DevSecOps piece is, again, something that isn't really, considered in a lot of test automation frameworks. But I am a huge fan of believing that a test automation, it is code, and it should definitely be treated as such. It should live in a repository. It should have security scanning. That you should be looking and making sure that your libraries or your open source code doesn't have malware in it, or isn't something that will expose your code to a third party. I have actively seen this at a previous place that I was consulting at. They were using a library that had malware, and it gave access to the systems through some nefarious actors. We saw this recently with a Python library where folks were using it, and it was actually gathering and sending credit card information to a VM that hackers then were able to access. And several financial companies were using this. So you want to make sure that you're treating your code, you're treating your test automation, framework, your test automation cases as code, and you have an overall strategy for how that should work. So understand, how is it kicked off? Hopefully it's not manual. Hopefully you're using something like a Jenkins or a GitHub Actions. You're storing it in a Bitbucket or a GitHub, something like that. You're doing active security scanning on it. So make sure you're writing that down, and that, it's something that you can look back on as we look to show business value, as we look to show, a robustness and a professionalism to our test automation approach. Being able to define these will really help your case. So some of this takes us into, the environmental considerations. This is one I know quite a few folks, do have this in your test automation, strategy. But so this is just kind of a reminder of, where should we be running our tests? Let's document the environments. What sort of, requirements? I have seen, especially when we look at things like performance testing, that if we don't have some sort of requirements specification or environments requirements, say that 10 times fast, then, our tests will fail, potentially due to environmental problems and not necessarily due to the test or the application under test. So you want to try to remove as many of those variables as possible. And, that way, when you get your test results, they're real, they're accurate. The failures are true, real failures. So make sure you know where you're running it, you're documenting where you're running it, as well as if there are requirements for your framework in terms of how it should run. If there's libraries or something that are required, make sure you're documenting those as well. So this, above all of them, is one of my favorite, and it has saved my bacon so many times. If you're not using some measure of logical organization for your tests, you're doing yourself a disservice. I'll say you're actually doing your future self a disservice. It may seem not very important as you're actively writing your tests and as you're actively going through your sprints or your waterfall cycles. However, when you look forward in terms of maintenance or execution of your framework as your tests grow, and I've worked with people that have had 10,000 or 50,000 tests inside of a suite or inside of their entire framework. Without having some measure of test tagging or organization, you're going to be really messed up in the future. I'm a big fan of inside of the testing strategy document, have what we call a collective tagging agreement, which means for all certification-based tests, for instance, we're not going to say cert, we're going to say certification. For regression, we're not going to say RE, we're going to say regression, or we're going to say release 1 or release 2, because if you're trying to run this, especially using something, some frameworks that would support a logical execution through Jenkins by passing parameters for your tags, then if you're not using a collective agreement, then you're potentially going to miss important tests that need to be run. So highly recommend looking into this. Again, there are some really good talks. I know my friend Leslie is talking here on some things. He's definitely a test tagging expert. Would recommend listening to his talks. His stuff is great. And there's a lot of other good talks around this. So and as well as some good articles online. So highly recommend look at this, research it, and if you don't have it implemented, definitely if you forget everything else I say in this entire talk, remember the test tagging piece. Very, very important. One of the things that you'll see as you grow and mature in your test strategy is that you'll find that some of the things that you're performing, if your developer is doing unit and integration testing, if you have teams doing potentially end-to-end testing or UAT or other types of things, you'll start finding some overlaps in these various pieces. And as you start looking at really honing in on how do we deliver faster while still maintaining a high level of security and quality, you can start being able to identify, well, we're doing the exact same tests from a unit and integration and a test automation standpoint. So do we really need to be doing all those? Well, if the unit and the integration tests potentially run fastest, maybe we can take that one test automation piece out and monitor our quality and see if anything dips. And if it doesn't, then we're good. Or we can say, hey, maybe we just run that test, once a week or once a release instead of having that as part of our daily run. So, but having all the various, pieces that we talked about previously documented in terms of your test tags, your high business value cases, your risk analysis, you'll be able to say, okay, great, we're actually running this test too often and it's not providing us value or the value that we would want. So maybe we can remove that and we can execute our suite faster while not sacrificing any quality. So this is something, again, you will see, from a standpoint of, growth from your test automation strategy. So just keep this in mind as you go. And for those of you out there who, are using effective test strategies right now, highly encourage you to take a look at, what efficiencies you might be able to find. And I see some great comments coming through as well. So I will here in a moment take a look at those when we get to the end. So thank you everyone for participating there. So you want to have two considerations. We'll talk about Agile first, and then we'll crank into Waterfall here in just a moment. So the first one from an Agile standpoint, I highly recommend, embrace your Agile and your DevOps tools. Look at things like Confluence and Jira. One of the ones I don't mention here that I'm a really big fan of is GitHub. We do a lot of our documentation inside of GitHub. We, make sure, because it's a place that our developers are going to already. It's a place where our testers are going to. So it makes sense for us to have our strategy documentation, our best practices, our guides inside of GitHub. So if your company is using GitHub or you have potentially some projects that you're working on from a personal standpoint, start leveraging GitHub. There's some great examples. I love the way that OWASP, which is OWASP, which is an application security organization. I love the way that they have done their GitHub. It's really, really wonderful. They've done a really good job there. One of the things as well from an Agile standpoint is, consider having a living document. We talked about that a little bit ago, and, potentially just update that and review it each sprint. There's no reason to reinvent the wheel every single sprint when you could potentially have something that you can modify, you can version, you can change as it goes from each sprint. Again, Don't think about a test strategy as a document, some sort of flat document. It's a process. It's a plan of action, and you can treat it as such, especially from an agile standpoint. And then from waterfall, one of the biggest things that we see here is that folks get a lot more time to potentially create their test strategy, their test automation strategy, and therefore it winds up becoming this 100+ page document that nobody ever reads. So just because you have that time, don't make a massive document. Look for bloat, look for problems that you could, or sections that don't make any sense, and rip them out. One of the other things, and this works really well for teams that now are 100% virtual or mostly virtual, is have what we like to call micro strategy sessions, where you're essentially kind of getting with the teams. You have little regular check-ins, maybe a 15 to 20-minute meeting. Say, hey, let's do a quick review of some of the things you've automated. Are we following the strategy? Are certain sections not important? And make sure that folks are sticking to that, because if you get into some of these longer testing cycles, especially related to waterfall, and several months may go by, and a lot of times towards the end of it, people stop reviewing the documents. They kind of get into this habit of testing the way that they're testing, and sometimes things are forgotten, especially from a test tagging standpoint. Sometimes people get potentially a little bit lazy, and they may not be tagging the way they should. So highly recommend take an agile approach right to that process and perform those regular check-ins. So, wrapping up here, I really can't, reinforce this enough. This is all about communication. It's communicating your plan of action to identify, the quality of the system. It's your plan of action to implement a solution that's going to, drive up, the business value, or to help us be, first to market, or, beat our customers by, innovating. And by having a documented strategy that clearly defines your goals, it defines the business value, it defines the technology, the people, the processes that are going to be involved, you'll be able to sit in front of executive, business partners, leaders, managers, the team, and say, this is what we're doing, and this is the reason why. And it will really allow you to win that support of your business partners. So that way, it's not going to be a technology versus business type thing. Everyone's in it together. And when you look, towards the future success of projects, and this is one of the key things that I learned, when I was on the consulting side of the house, is without the support of the financial or the business side, most projects wind up failing, in a year or two, because they either run out of money, they have a lack of vision, people change jobs, managers change jobs. I have actually had this at the previous place I worked at, is where I had a project approved, the CTO left, and the project was no longer approved because we didn't write it down. Now we sat in front of them and we said, this is a really great idea. This is why we should be doing this, but we didn't write it down. We didn't document those goals because we thought, well, he had our total support. So if that was the case, why should we write it down? But then he left, and then our project was canceled. So, I've actually been there. Next, it'll allow you to invest in the right technology, making sure you're using the right solution. And then finally, you use that as a basis for innovation and growth. So with that, want to give a big thanks to, again, my friends over at Catalan. They do have a virtual booth. So I believe, Dave, I'm not sure if you can put that link here in the chat for that session. But, take a look at them. Again, so it's a wonderful solution. Have a lot of friends over there for that. And with that, again, thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all, and we'll see what questions we might have. All right, let me scroll up here. So Dave, how many minutes do I have to answer questions here?
It says we go to about 10 after, but you can always create another room, and you can have people chat with you there as well. Also, okay. I'll be putting into the chat the survey for everyone to fill out at the end of the chat.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I see a couple questions about test tagging. Yeah, so I'll grab some and put them into a chat, as well as post some to my LinkedIn profile here as well. So I'll grab a couple good ones. There's some again my friend Leslie is speaking on some test automation pieces, so he'd be a great person to ask. And there's a couple great ones around Cucumber as well that I can get up. So So with that, that seems to be the one main question. So Angela, thank you for helping to post some information here as well. Really appreciate it. And Dave, I believe I am done from my side. So thank you so much, everyone.